The running back dominoes continue to fall for dynasty leagues, and Jamaal Williams is front and center after his big usage last week, especially near the goal line. DeAndre Swift probably going to miss some time. That and more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, running back injuries were light in the first couple weeks. Week 3, we got a few changing landscapes here, starting with Detroit.
Yeah, when I heard DeAndre Swift was going to be out, all I thought was one thing. If Jamaal Williams can be running back 8 with DeAndre Swift sharing the backfield with him, what can he be on his own? And I think that this is an awesome matchup against Seattle this week. We're writing it up for our running back matchups, our running game matchups this week. He has a really high end ceiling in this backfield. This is one of the premier backfields in terms of expected points scored, and it has been. They are top 10 in expected points, and they're moving the ball, right? So they're constantly moving the ball and springing big runs. I'm super excited for what Jamaal Williams can offer in a short sample size.
Yeah, I think my go-to phrase for about 8 months was Jared Goff sneaky good. Yep. But I think we need to wipe that moniker away because he's just been good. And he's been a facilitator of offense, a facilitator of fantasy points, and a facilitator of quality opportunities for running back. The high leveraging opportunities is a feature over at Footballguys. You can see every single week how that develops at the running back position that I pin, so you can find that. They've been top 14 every single week, the Lions have, in terms of combining weighted targets and goal line opportunities. Jamaal Williams has dominated those goal line opportunities. And he was a guy that we mentioned in August that he was going to be on the flex or running back 2 radar, even with DeAndre Swift healthy. So that's been a huge boost. Now that we can clarify that and you get someone like Chase Reynolds moving into that number 2 spot, that's not going to have the same bump as Jamaal Williams in the running back 2 spot. So yeah, that's a big one in terms of this Lions offense. And we've also got Amon-Ra St. Brown potentially on the mend. So things could look a little differently these next couple of weeks as they probably rest DeAndre Swift through the bye, as they mentioned. Get 2 games missed, but 3 weeks for him to heal from his multiple injuries.
Hey, is this a Madison theory? Is this our Madison corollary, right? Where we have a backup that's pretty good. That's and there might be a split. There might not be a split between the starter, right? But it's really the distance between the starter and the backup isn't that large. And then when you actually look at the backup versus the number 3 spot, that's where it's a huge chasm. And what you end up seeing is in a situation like Dalvin Cook, where Madison comes in, Madison's actually getting all of the workload as compared to where Dalvin Cook was getting siphoned off a little bit by Madison. We could be in that situation where Jamaal Williams. Now, I think Craig Reynolds is interesting, but I think Jamaal Williams is probably closer to DeAndre Swift than he is Craig Reynolds. And if that's going to be the case, we could definitely be in a Madison situation where he sees almost all of the potential work. I think it's a really interesting week for him.
Jordan playing the hits. Yeah. Getting to talk about this means we're in season mode. And yeah, that number 3 back a lot of times is a bigger divide for running back 2 than it is running back 1 to running back 2 on some of these depth charts. And frankly, those are the running backs we like to go after, the ones that could have a higher market share than the split we see with the starter still healthy. I wanted to mention a couple of running backs that, as I look at targets and high leverage opportunities there on a weekly basis for Footballguys, that just kind of stood out. And the 2 older running backs, ones that have high upside expectations annually, they've been there, done that with running back 1 seasons. And that is Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. And 2 offenses that have struggled a little bit, more so Carolina than New Orleans. And I am just perplexed when you say these are 2 of the premier pass catching running backs in the NFL. Yet the Saints are 17th in running back targets. And I know Kamara missed a little bit of time, but still, they weren't good before he missed time. And then you have Carolina, 19th in running back targets. Leonard Fournette, you could also throw him into this bucket where you say, oh, so many questions at wide receiver. Why aren't they targeting Leonard Fournette more in the pass game? Easy yards. Baker Mayfield needs easy yards because all of his yards are tough right now. And so you say, I don't blame these players. They are being used like regular, quote unquote, regular running backs that don't have any elevated skill as a pass catcher. And fantasy wise, I know there's probably plenty of teams with Kamara, with McCaffrey, to Leonard Fournette that don't have the record that they thought they would have through 3 games, or want to have through 3 games. Might be 1-2, might be 0-3, but I will just say it is literally utilization and optimization for these teams about getting these high leverage looks that is holding back these otherwise very good players when you put them in their rightful bucket of how they're being used.
Yeah, I was just looking this up while you were talking. It's even worse than you just said. So Carolina is 29th in routes per actual drop back, right? Which is horrific when you have McCaffrey, and the Saints are actually 27th. So not only like that, like just in the aggregate is their number really low, but on a per play basis, it's absolutely it's borderline malpractice.
Not getting out there, not getting out in routes.
Crazy.
Right,
It's crazy. And we know that McCaffrey and Kamara, for that matter, their routes have been the most valuable amongst the running back position since they've come into the league. It's those two guys in a huge chasm. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you have a different quarterback there with Mayfield, but that shouldn't really change McCaffrey being in routes. You know, it's a new coaching staff there with Kamara, so that could be a little bit of a change. But I don't know. I'm surprised that we haven't gotten them in the passing game, because that's like, I mean, McCaffrey in the receiving game is the right answer to like a lot of questions for them. You know, and so is Kamara. So with the Saints. So I'm interested to see how that changes going forward, but it's malpractice so far.
If the running backs for Buffalo can be number 2 in the NFL in targets, I'm sure McCaffrey can fit his way into the top 10 somehow.
Yes.
Devin, they have no interest in running the ball, but the running backs are getting peppered now, throwing 63 times in a game. You know, that'll obviously bump your numbers. I think the Jets in week 1, they had like 19 running back targets, just insane number. That's going to propel them to being highly rated in the category for weeks on end, even if it tapers down with Zach Wilson. But yeah, some of these other teams that are higher than those elite pass catching running back option teams, unbelievable. All right, Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 122 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. And want to remind you to subscribe to footballguys.com. It is where all of our content lives. You've got different memberships now. You can, if you're a dynasty-centric person listening to this show, you play some DFS, you play mostly redraft, whatever your content that you're seeking, that is part of a custom plan for a membership. And we've talked about it before, but the Football Guys League Dominator, we use it on a weekly basis. If you manage a bunch of different waiver wires, if you're managing lineups, if you're trying to have trades created for you to fill your needs, balance out your team, and strengthen your roster for the playoff push, you're going to want to get the League Dominator. You import all of your leagues, and it really tells you within 5 to 10 seconds with some of these leagues what you need to do. And again, subscribing to footballguys.com is the way to do that. Go over to footballguys.com/dynasty winners.
It's time for the Stash of the Week, powered by Sleeper.
That's right. Our Stash of the Week provided by Sleeper, powered by Sleeper here. And we have a running back that is under the radar, one that you probably weren't thinking about week 1, week 2. And in fact, the starter of the team in question is just back making his debut in week 3, J.K. Dobbins. And that is going to be Justice Hill, largely available in Dynasty. And Justice Hill is one that he saw a clear market share. It's Kenyon Drake, go sit over there. Mike Davis, go sit over there. They're going with the young guns. With now Justice Hill has a big window potentially to be the running back 2 and benefit if J.K. Dobbins were to miss time going forward.
I admire what they've done. It's like, hey, Mike Davis, you're not working out. Kenyon Drake, you're up. Kenyon Drake, you're not working out. Justice Hill, you're up. J.K. Dobbins, you're up. I actually admire that philosophy of turning it over. And I think like they've shown me, I don't know if it's hesitancy, but they want to protect J.K. Dobbins, right? They don't want to sort of rush him back in there. That was a bad knee injury and leg injury generally. They've shown the desire to protect him. And I think playing Justice Hill ahead of him in snaps is part of that. And if that's going to be the case, going forward, I think Justice Hill could be he's essentially an injury away plus guy, right? Might have some lineup viability depending on the particular matchup. And if something happens to Dobbins, right, he presumably steps into that lead role, and you feel more comfortable from him on a week-to-week basis. So yeah, Justice Hill I think is a really good stash, and a guy that I wrote up for waivers of the future this week, and I'm excited about adding on the waiver wire here before waivers run this week.
Yeah, one caveat, and again, Justice Hill, the innate upside of Baltimore, and this bleeds over to J.K. Dobbins. He's recovering from a significant injury last year, but Baltimore has not been a good ecosystem for high upside opportunities for running backs. So you need to be careful. They've been pretty low. Right now, they're 32nd in targets. I know Dobbins got, I think, 2 or 3 of them this past week, but in general, this has not been a good running back situation to propel. So if you don't have a dominant, just lid lifting talent like Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry are 2 guys that have produced well above what their high leverage opportunities have been over the years, it's very rare. So Dobbins, is he in that bucket the year after his injury? Probably not. In 2023, I don't know, maybe, but we're talking for this season right now. And again, they are dead last in high leverage opportunity score. So you need to be very careful about J.K. Dobbins and the upside that presents. But Justice Hill, again, if he even projects as the next week as the starter, you have someone that's flippable. You have someone that you can add to a deal, grease the wheels, as we like to say, and get something done for an upgrade at another spot. So there's value here. And frankly, what do you project for the waiver actual bidding strategy, Jordan? Because I don't think Justice Hill is going to be sought after and a super aggressive target globally in dynasty leagues.
Well, you and I were having this conversation beforehand. I mean, him and Craig Reynolds both in that sort of category this week. And I think there's other eye candy out there, like a guy like Mac Hollins, people might be more interested in, right? I think there's other distraction points, even a guy like Brian Hoyer in Superflex. There's other things that are sort of going on that I think Reynolds and Justice Hill could slide under the radar. Does 5% sound like that gets it done for these guys?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, somewhere in the 3 to 5% range. And I think that probably gets them. Again, if you're in 2 leagues, and you really need to have them and you know your league pretty well, maybe you bump above that. But I will say when you play the macro approach of like portfolios of 10, 20 leagues or whatever, you put that in, I think you get them a lot of times. Maybe there's a rogue league or 2 where that someone ends up going above that. But I think you have to ask yourself, how many times is a primary backup running back, and pretty clearly so, and someone that could be that for the entire season, how often is that available on the waiver wire? If you're cleaning up the loose ends, you're bidding 1%, $1 here and there, and you're generally proactive, I would say it's not available all the time. So spending 5 to 10% to me sounds aggressive, but kind of appropriate if that's your DNA in terms of what you go after on the waiver wire.
What do you think, 10 times a year? Does this situation happen 10 times a year where you have a guy that's a pure backup that comes in, or that wasn't a pure backup, there's an injury ahead of him and he actually slides in to be the pure backup, where it's someone you actually are interested in, right? Where it's a guy that's, has either a profile that you're interested in or some prototypical size elements to him that you could actually be interested in. It might be 10, it might be a dozen times a year, probably less than that, where this situation actually presents itself. So again, if you're sort of adding that up, 5, 7, 10, something in that sort of, in that range, if you do that a bunch of times, it's kind of the bidder that I am in waivers. I think that makes a lot of sense the way you put that.
And if you look at it, I mean, let's say, I'm going to go after Kene Nwangwu, or I'm going to go after Chase Reynolds. They're on much shorter timetables. Like, we don't have the amount of clarity. Like, I think the clarity factor is something that a lot of people miss in the analysis of what's going to change on this Baltimore depth chart. Gus Edwards coming back at some point later in the year. That's probably the biggest threat. Still a high variable, but DeAndre Swift, within a few weeks, he's going to be playing. So you're going to need a re-injury. You're going to need something else to occur. And even if Jamaal Williams goes down this week or next week, there could be 0 window. There could be a 1 week window. It's very small. Justice Hill has a pretty big window. And that's why I like to scale my bidding or aggressiveness based on what is that window, but also know yourself. Because if you're a GM that's going to move and shake and like, if Justice Hill doesn't get 9 touches next week, I'm going to move on. Then yeah, you probably don't want to bid on him. You want to go 1% or something like that, just because you wouldn't want to waste it and get frustrated. But if you're one that you're looking at the macro view and you just want to have those probability shots of getting a starting running back, then that's going to be something that's considered more valuable to you.
Yeah, last year, by the way, Craig Reynolds had 2 starts, 26 carries, 112 yards, and he had 1 catch for 5 yards in his first start. That was in week 15 last year, and then he got hurt in the final week of the season where he started. But we have proof of concept that he can play, and I think that he's an interesting, maybe 5 to 10 touch guy with Swift out anyways.
First dynasty trade question here from a listener, and he wanted to go over the strategy to address quarterback or tight end in a no premium, no frills stock format. It seems like everyone wants to hog 2 good ones, so it sounds like it's one of those type of formats. A lot of people have 2 quarterbacks. A lot of people, if they have 1 good tight end, they're fine having another one. So he's currently forced to start Justin Fields. He's waiting on Deshaun Watson. And he traded a 4th for Jameis Winston. He has Irv Smith, Evan Ingram, Cole Kmet. So that hasn't been ideal. Evan Ingram is coming on, though. So what is your advice for handling the no frills kind of stock PPR format if he's clearly behind on both of those positions?
You and I were talking about this before the show. And if you don't have a top 3 to 5 tight end, don't pay for one. Like don't pay to
tight
get
end 7 prices.
Right. Don't do that. Just because it's such a flat tier, the difference doesn't hurt you. What hurts you is, giving away assets to move up that point or 2 a week. Like it's really not something that you should invest in. Now, if you can make a difference, what I would suggest to you is if, be really, when you have these situations, you're getting to the part of the season where there's going to be people that are going to be resetting the clock. Right. They're going to say, all right, now's the time I want to rebuild. Like I don't want to get stuck with, old quarterback. I don't want to get stuck with old tight end. So I want to start making some changes. If I'm 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, 2-5, something like that. Like this is the month where those things begin to happen. Be really attuned to that. Right. So start thinking about that. A guy that I might suggest that you could go after if you're interested in sort of upticking. If the Brady GM's probably in a selling mood because they haven't started well. Right. It's not looking great for his prognosis. Right. That's a place you potentially pounce on for a cheap upgrade because I think things are going to turn around once they get a little bit healthier. Can you pounce on a guy like Russell Wilson? Right now might be a cheap time to do that. I don't think you necessarily need to go that expensive because you have a guy like Deshaun Watson sort of coming down the pike for you. But that would be something I'd look at. Another guy, if you're thinking about a tight end to keep back, to try and backfill, to try and get some juice in your lineup, is the Zach Ertz GM. Are they contending? Is the Kelsey GM? Are they contending? Is the person that has Waller? Are they shaky? Right. I'm in the midst of some Waller negotiations as I sit here right now. Right. And that came to me. So usually when that happens, like that's kind of a signal to me that, hey, that person's available. So those are all things that I'd be looking at. And again, I sort of look at these. I don't want to go out in the market and be desperate. I want to sort of pounce on desperation. Right. That would be the thing that I would say in both of these situations. I don't think these are super. These aren't spots where you pay a ton in these formats.
Yeah, I think poking around, sending offers, looking at the bottom of the standings, like you said, that's all proactive moves. And but having a price, seeing, poking, knocking on doors, but not paying anything. Not saying I have to fix this no matter what, because I actually like, Evan Ingram has shown good utilization in terms of routes and he's coming around. I mean, if there's an injury to that wide receiver depth chart, then he could be cooking with gas. He's already near the top 12. And like you mentioned, there's not a big difference. If you're a tight end, if you have tight end 5 or 6 through 20, or just etc. through the end of the entire usable spectrum of what's generally started in your league, you're in the ballpark. You're in the game. Like you could have a pop big game or a down game or whatever, but it's all going to even out in the wash. So really look for those, as you said, older players that are on those other depth charts. And quarterback, they're being hoarded. I get that, but Brady should be available pretty cheap. I've said before, when he gets 2 of his weapons back between Evans, Julio, and Godwin, if he gets 2 of those guys back, everything's going to be fine. He might be a mid to high quarterback 1 at that point in time. Evans is coming back this week. Who's going to be next? So that's going to be something he has dealt with weapons that are probably similar to when he won his first Super Bowl with the Patriots this last week. That was pretty poor. And he was going up against a pretty good defense. So I think, and that's two defenses, I believe, in the first three that have been, we're going to look back, some of the stronger ones. So I think you have to be careful about the small sample size alert. And a lot of times Brady, they're giving him away now for prices that are assuming and locked in that he's playing just this 1 year. He may very well play 1 year and retire. But if he doesn't, I think there's a lot of profit potential on the back end here. And again, you should be paying cheap prices. My general threshold in a start one is I start with a third round pick, because in the past I've traded a third or two, and this is like 2 years ago for Aaron Rodgers. You can probably get Brady for that price. You throw a third at somebody that is strong at quarterback, quote unquote strong, and their QB3 is like, you mentioned you traded a fourth for Winston. Good. Mm-hmm. That's good process. Go cheap, go for high end, high variance outcome. And again, I think honestly, starting Winston in a start one, you're okay. You're okay. So I wouldn't freak out too much, but if you could get a Brady for a third, that might be the max I do. Is it Kirk Cousins? Is it Derek Carr? Guys like that for a third. Mm-hmm. Russell Wilson, maybe their GM isn't all that happy. I know Denver and the fans aren't that happy with Russell Wilson and everything going on there. So pick your spot. Aaron Rodgers, same sort of thing. Third, if you can do things like that, poke around for a cheap price, explore that. But I think you're, probably addressing other positions and being strong, and maybe finding a top tight end is maybe more important than the quarterback part. All right, we got some trades this week to analyze. Amon-Ra St. Brown. He has first down game in 10 games going back to mid last season. And who knows? He's dealing with a little bit of injury there. Could help Hawkinson. We've got Swift out. Interesting situation with the Lions in the next few weeks. But we got Amon-Ra St. Brown in Superflex, traded for James Cook, receiver of a number of targets late in last week's game, and a 23 first.
So I keep going back to with the considering the future first aspect of this. Are you going to get better than Amon-Ra St. Brown? And right, if you have a guy that's already producing, right, typically we would say you always flip a day 3 wide receiver for a first round pick. That's typically the rule. However, that changes once the person actually produces. This is a situation where Amon-Ra St. Brown has actually reached the level of actually producing. So I sort of readjust that and think about, right, now he's in the quote good tier of day 3 guys. You could sort of elevate him. I think he's sort of in that range where he justifies that cost. The question is really what you think about James Cook. If you think James Cook's the late first from this year and still think he's there, this is like 2 firsts for Amon-Ra St. Brown. But if you think James Cook is kind of like, hey, they keep throwing him the ball and it keeps bouncing off of his hands, or hey, like he's fumbleitis, or like if you sort of think of him as
he's got 2 other day 2 guys on his depth chart, what's going to change in the very short term?
Right. By the way, it's funny, I've spent a year mocking Devin Singletary's receiving a performance.
It's been a part-time job for you.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that he dominated this week on the pass.
How many targets did he get? 11?
In fairness, I think they threw 63
times.
I think Josh Allen.
A jillion, rounded up to a jillion. With the humidity, his arm is still tired. He's got a rocket. He's got one of the strongest arms in the NFL. He is tired.
Yeah, so he goes 9 for 78, and actually does so efficiently despite playing all those plays. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. So I think about that, and I know you this might be a good situation for you to talk about James Cook, because I know that you're one that has been sort of skeptical of that price for him, and I wonder how you sort of calculate this deal, because I'm intrigued with Amon-Ra St. Brown, depending on if I know a little bit more about the scale of that pick.
Yeah, I'm just skeptical James Cook gets all the way home to be an actual, not workhorse, but I guess whatever 2022 version workhorse means in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And I'm skeptical that the Bills actually have that role available for somebody in the predictability. I mean, Devin Singletary had a good game. They threw the ball 60 plus times. It was an outlier game. They threw it to running backs an abnormal amount, a Jets week 1 sort of amount to the running back position. So I just, if he gets all the way home as a predictable starter, and then he's used in a typical fashion, I can see taking that side of this deal. I love first round picks. I love staying flexible. But when you talk about adjusting priors, so Amon-Ra St. Brown is one that the most recent update I did to my own values and rankings, he's one that I think I'm still a little below the market, but I think I'm far closer to the market than I was previously. And part of that was I was higher on, and you saw it this past week, DJ Chark, Josh Reynolds. These are functional NFL receivers. And Hawkinson being there, Swift being there. I did not expect Amon-Ra St. Brown to have the dominant market share that he has had through 3 weeks. And he's done it not just for a chunk of last year, but now this year. And again, he was a success track guy. I think he was wide receiver 30, 32, something like that in adjusted points per game for the aggregate of last year. And if you're in the top 45 as a day 3 guy, that is such a hammering win historically. And you've mentioned the key outlier names of Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill and a few others that just, you have to look at them differently. And honestly, if they produce right away, it's almost like a bigger positive indicator than a day 2 guy, for example, producing relatively, early in their career, because it's so unexpected. It so rarely happens. And so they must be so clearly good that the pedigree has not held them back. So I think it's really interesting. So I have him now in my top 15 or 16 dynasty wide receivers because, yeah, it's a packed group. It's a deep position, but he is dominating market share to such a point. And you don't have a Baker Mayfield situation where the quarterback's holding him back right now. So I think in the landscape of especially starting 3+ wide receivers in a format like that, and you're adding Amon-Ra St. Brown, that pick, if it's yours, is going to be on the later side. And then otherwise you wouldn't trade it away probably. I just think in general, I would take Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that's something 6 months ago I would be like, you're kidding. But I think it's important to continually reassess. And one of those success failure tracks and what trajectory are you on? What does your profile say now? That's something that I'm becoming very sensitive to about readjusting as we go. And I know we're only 33 games into the season, but this is still a second season where he's on the strong success track. And now you say he's a different player than Stephon Diggs, but you say, or Tyreek Hill, but he's on that early production track that you just cannot deny at a certain point. You can still say, I wouldn't have him at wide receiver 5, 6, 7, or I mean, some people have him way up there. So I'm not there, but I'm much more in the zip code than I was a few months ago.
Yeah, I was just peeking at the stats too. He's been targeted on 32.4% of his routes.
That's a Devontae Adams like number, right?
Absolutely. That's an outrageous number.
Yeah.
His yards per route run 2.48. Again, that's just enormous. That you don't get there by accident. And again, this is stuff people.
It's not him and a bunch of Joes in that passing game. I just said the 3-4 guys that are also on that team. You would expect, if you play the simulation out and you just say, okay, they signed DJ Chark, they signed Josh Reynolds, they have Swift, they have Hawkinson. You would say probably if you play that simulation out, knowing only the profiles, you would say, well, Hawkinson has a chance to be, a Mark Andrews type, or a Kelsey type of just, he's going to be the wide receiver 1. That's not happening as a top 10 tight end. Swift, is not averaging, he's not on the super elite setting target records. Those are the guys with pedigree, the biggest pedigree. Chark has had a top 24 season. None of those things are occurring. They're saying we want that guy to get the ball. So at some point you can't deny what that says. And you got to get over this whole, he's not 6'3". You're on a 4.45. You have to get over all this other stuff. He was productive at USC. And he had a high projection model score. And here he is producing early in the NFL.
The name Antonio Brown came up in my thought process today when I was talking about him. And it's the same. That's heavy praise. And again, it's worth noting. We talk about priors a lot. Our priors are not to throw around Antonio Brown and comping him to day 3 wide receivers. That's not what we do. But that is sort of he has put himself in that type of conversation with just how dominant he has been. And again, when you say, hey, there's athletic limitations, there's size limitations, when you have those and you come in and you are as dominant as he is being right now, you have to say at some point it's you go back to Moneyball, right? It's the guy that's the discount, right? That he doesn't look good, he doesn't have the pretty girlfriend, but he gets on base all the time, right? He's undervalued for reasons that are largely cosmetic. I think that's what's going on with Amon-Ra St. Brown with people still, if you're still hanging to his prior as a day 3 guy, I think you really have to adjust that with how dominant he's been. And it has not been smoke and mirrors. It is not the Travis Fulgham smoke and mirrors type situation.
Yeah, I've said the the proxy for if you want to scout and do all these toolsy parts of a skill position, especially wide receiver or tight end, just go look at production score.
Mm-hmm.
Just look at that, because if a guy's winning, like for example, Mark Andrews, he didn't come out with like the best physical profile. He was a good enough athlete, but you know what he did? Produce.
Dominate.
Produce. Yeah. And so Amon-Ra St. Brown, same sort of thing. Juju Smith-Schuster, when he came out, again, same USC program, but same thing. Like, I don't know if he's athletic enough. Look at some of these routes. He produced right away. So I think you have to be very careful about, getting too stuck. And wide receiver is the one position that I would say, being toolsy. And even if you don't run you can run a 4.55, but if you can break off a route and you are flexible to running a variety of different routes, different positions, and that's going to carry over. If you were doing that at 19 years old, you go to 22, 23 years old in the NFL, it's going to carry over. So I do think Amon-Ra St. Brown had the perfect storm of opportunity last year where he wasn't sitting as 4th on a depth chart and he got to play and show those things right away. So that helps. But at this point, again, Chark is a legit player. Josh Reynolds has been in the NFL for a long time, 2 other high pedigree guys in the passing game. You can't deny that he's doing it with requisite talent around him. So this was really the year of prove it to me. For me, some people I know moved him heavily in the offseason, but I needed to see it for a few more games and in a different situation and setting in 2022. And he's doing that so far. All right, let's go to the next trade. We've got no frills, 1 quarterback league. We got Travis Kelce and a 23 first for Kyle Pitts.
I think the question you have to ask yourself is how much can Pitts make you pay? And one of the things, like, I have to write this up at some point because I'm going to keep talking about it without it written. I'd like to be able to reference people to it, but we were talking about this before the show. And when you look at tight ends, there's a group of tight ends who have finished in the top as the tight end 1 in this century. It's 9 of them. And on the list, like, Mark Andrews just did it last year, so set him aside for a second, right? There's been 2 one-hit wonders. Those are Todd Heap and Dallas Clark. But you've been as likely to finish as there once as you have been 5 times. But I think that as you look at that number, like, it is the hardest accomplishment to actually achieve, right? A quarterback 1, wide receiver 1, and running back 1 have all been much more dispersed. There's been a lot more people involved in those conversations, double the amount of running backs in that conversation than tight ends. To get to that level is a huge accomplishment. If you sort of come at it with the thought of, hey, Pitts hasn't done that yet, and you think, all right, like, going forward, how likely is he to get there, knowing it's an extremely difficult thing to get to? And Kelce's already there, right? If you're sort of pocketing a first in a non-premium position, my question is how much does the downgrade in the backside of that, of where maybe Pitts is in his prime and Kelce's aging out, right? How much does that hurt you versus a first? But I mean, in the meantime, Kelce might add you a win over Pitts, right? Like, he might crush Pitts in the near term. And if that's going to be the case, like, adding a first on top of that is like, that's a turbocharge to your team. So I think it's a 2-way go. And I think it's a pretty interesting 2-way go in a format that, frankly, even if Pitts is like superhuman, it's not that damaging to you. Like, tight end is in a position where it's like, if Christian McCaffrey goes thermonuclear, he can destroy everything. The tight end position is not like that with the way it's typically scored. So that's kind of my lean. I would lean the Kelce first side because I think it's a 2-way go.
Yeah, I think the no premiums is a big aspect. I wonder when the pressure is building on Kyle Pitts. I mean, I know he relieved a lot of that in week 3. He had a decent/good game. 2 weeks where you could argue through week 2, he was one of the most disappointing dynasty players versus what the expectation was. He's going to come in, set records. He's going to produce like the tight end 1, not just be valued like the tight end 1. And I kind of wonder what's the patience level going to be for him if he doesn't actually produce tight end 1, be right there at the tight end 2 or tight end 3, but it's kind of a cluster. If he's not right there with the leaders at the position in production, how much latitude is he going to get? I'm assuming it's going to be beyond this year. He got a slow start. He's like tight end, 18, 19 or something right now. Like it doesn't take much to zoom up to probably tight end 7. Like you could probably have 2 more decent games for him, not even score a touchdown, and he'll be tight end 9 or something. So I think that he's going to have a long leash, but I do think it's an interesting question of when do you join that top end? Like you are in the club. Like if you don't do that, and he was kind of borderline-ish. He was below the top guys last year, but he was in that next group of challengers. Everyone assumed he's going to take this step. But if he doesn't actually make it, how many times does he get a pass? What if Drake London, who's already producing, 21 years old, he's kind of doing the Kyle Pitts 2021 thing. That like, what if Drake London's doing a 35-40% market share and Pitts is like soaking coverage? That's been the dialogue for 3 weeks. Pitts is soaking it up. London's running the routes that are getting paid. So what if that's the situation and Pitts is Robin, not Batman? I just wonder, are we going to see a reversal and Pitts is, again, tight end's relatively weak right now. Waller's taking a step back. We'll see about Kittle. He finally started playing this past week. I just wonder, it could be a very interesting trade landscape or value landscape if Pitts is like tight end 5 this year. Mm-hmm. Like, what does that mean?
It's mean that Andrews has crushed him. That's what it means.
Exactly. Right? Like, and he's 27, 28. And it's like, so at some point, again, I totally get the insulation of a profile thing. But at some point, you actually have to do it. Otherwise, the bet is meaningless. If you bet on Pitts and his high is like tight end 4 through 2023, you lost. Big, because it was literally you're taking him over Andrews in premium formats. We're not even talking like if 2 tight end, massive 1.5, 1.75, 2.0. Just keep extrapolating what that difference is. One guy is the clear-cut go-to option on their passing game. The other guy is now contending with another top 10 pick.
Yeah. Can I first of all, from what you just said, I want to get, at some point you actually have to do it, put on a t-shirt. So we're going to have to go to the Football Guys shop and get that put on a t-shirt as the official Dynasty Show t-shirt.
Insulation is great at some point produced, but that's a roundabout way of saying I'll take Kelsey in the first. We have done the longest roundabout ways of answering these questions about trades this week. We talked for 8 minutes on Amon-Ra St. Brown before answering the question. You were just like, well, it depends about how you feel about James Cook.
Right. But so it's funny though. Can we, let's just keep sidetracking for a second. You brought up a name that I've just been gushing about, which is Drake London. I think you can legitimately, there's a real possibility that if we sit here in 3 months that Drake London's a top 3 wide receiver in Dynasty. Like, I think we are on our way to that being in the conversation.
That's tough because you have Jefferson and Chase kind of in there. Like you could say the conversation starts at wide receiver 3.
I picked 3 for a reason. Yeah. And I think that you could get
it's open. It's relatively open, right? Yeah.
Because, and I'll tell you what, like, you look at absolutely domination, 2.74 yards per route run through 3 weeks as a rookie is just absolutely ludicrous. He's being targeted on 30.8% of his routes. That is
owning the passing game. Right.
Unbelievable. As a 3 weeks in, what I think
21.1 years old.
Right.
And a guy that, again, you want to talk about pedigree. You want to talk about physical traits of like, this is the profile we used to chase years ago. 6'4 plus, rangy. Again, he's not the same route tree or same skills guy, but he's the size of baby Mike Evans.
Yes.
He's coming out and producing right away.
Yes. What's one thing that happened at USC that he got actually dinged for, which was, hey, he's never separates.
Yeah.
Their passing game was to
separation's
say,
a myth, but yeah.
right, their passing game was to say that, hey, we don't care if he's separate. We don't care if
gonna
he's
throw
covered
it
on
at
a
him.
route. We're going to throw it at him, right? Like,
And now he's actually getting open. It's like, well, that's a plus. We'll throw it to him then too.
right.
Okay,
And
so we're okay
yeah.
throwing it to him if he's contested, but if he's uncontested, I think he'll get looks too. It'll be okay. Look at that big giant antelope that's wide open. Let's throw it to that guy. Right. But I do think it's an interesting for all the, there's certain people in a dynasty startup, for example, they're not going to take Cooper Kupp. They're not going to take Stephon Diggs or AJ Brown or Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill or just keep going. These older guys. But I think the conversation, like you said, Drake London is now in it. CeeDee Lamb or T. Higgins or Jalen Waddle or, I don't know, Amon-Ra St. Brown maybe. Or one or two other guys, maybe Garrett Wilson. Who knows where we're headed with this? But, I mean, they're looking for young and not just 25, 26, hyper young, 23, 22, who's done it enough, but they're really young. So, yeah, Drake London is in that pocket right there. Don't be surprised to see him in January, first round startup pick. Don't be surprised. Mm-hmm. We're headed in that direction.
Absolutely. Hey, just by the way, let's just shout out his stats, his separation stats for a second. 3.4 yards per contact of separation per target. Where does that rank? Like, what is that relative to? How about 3.1 for Justin Jefferson? So he's actually beating Justin Jefferson. He's beating dynasty darlings like Rashad Bateman as well. He's performing perfectly fine in that concern space, and they are just peppering him. Right, that is a true dominant wide receiver one profile.
He's doing it with Marcus Mariota. Reminder. It's Marcus Mariota at quarterback, who's been sneaky decent as well. All right, last one. We got Christian McCaffrey in a one quarterback league for a 223 first, both projected to be, not the worst teams in the league, mid-later projection. So are we still there with Christian McCaffrey in terms of 2 firsts? Is this how you would spend 2 firsts?
Coming into the season, I would have said, yeah, I kind of dig that cost. I'm a little bit tepid as we sit here right now about their usage of him, and I think you brought up some very valid points early on in this podcast. Still at a top 12 running back, I still think if you put an optimized Christian McCaffrey is the best running back, right? A healthy, optimized Christian McCaffrey has proven over and over again that no one can touch him. The problem is
that right now.
He's half that right now. And so, I think I may be shooting less, right? I might, if we have questions about the usage, I would maybe shoot at something less and not use both firsts would sort of be my first assumption. Can you go out and try and get someone like Aaron Jones for less? Can you try and get Austin Eckler for a lot?
Probably for a single first, yeah.
Correct. Can you get Leonard Fournette for a lot less, right? Like I think if we have sort of those questions and concerns about McCaffrey's overall ceiling, and maybe it's just not present in the construct of this offense, we can use those picks for something cheaper that is much more replicatable.
Does Swift cost 2 firsts right now?
Probably not.
Just like not many running backs. Taylor might be the only one that legitimately you kind of go into the market saying, I know I have to pay 2 firsts, right? It's a pretty short list. Maybe depending on the league, Swift, but Swift is 4 years younger. So 3 years younger. So, and he's getting optimized. So I think, you got to be careful. Got to be careful about diving in. And that's why I posed it, is that the way you would spend 2 firsts? Because let's assume you have to spend it, that it's monopoly money pouring out of your pockets.
Yes.
All right. Want to remind you about the Football Guys daily email update. And that is available at footballguys.com/dynastyshow. It's the right upside, home part of the homepage up there for footballguys.com. 600,000 of your league mates, not all of your league mates, but all your league mates are on the list. And you don't want to miss the news. We talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown, talked about DeAndre Swift, Mac Jones this week. We got a lot of things we're monitoring, a lot of things in the Dynasty hopper. Every single day, you're going to get a condensed list of some content. Also, you're going to get a list of injuries we're tracking and analysis. So you don't want to miss it. You want that daily catch-up, called by Joe Bryant, analysis of the staff, and that is the Football Guys daily email update. All right, time for the dumbest thing I did this week. It's my turn. Jordan was up with a fantasy-centric faux pas last week. I laughed for about 5 minutes when we were still on the call from recording the Football Guys show, and Jordan could not figure out why I could propose trades and he could not on a co-GM league. But I have one that can probably best everybody. So this is my first time being to New Orleans to observe the city, go in a couple times. It's been a lot of fun.
I'm so excited for where this is
yeah,
going.
you have no idea. This is like level 11 dumbness. There's a lot of ways you can go dumb in New Orleans, but this is like level 1. I mean, having a cell phone in your pocket prevented all this, and yet I still couldn't solve it. So we go downtown, the downtown, French Quarter-ish area. And, the idea is, you walk around. We had a place we wanted to go to for dinner, hear some music and stuff like that. So we start walking around. And it's like, there's not a lot of people. Like I expected Saturday night, mind you, expected to be more crowded. Like, nice weather. Like it's not really a reason for everyone to be avoiding such a major frequented metropolitan area. And couldn't figure it out. Walked for, 10, 15 minutes. Again, great time. We're having a great time. But the people watching, light on the traffic. And it's like, realized, not on the actual strip. The strip, Bourbon Street. How many times have you been on a Saints broadcast, especially during the Drew Brees era, where the opening shot for Fox Football is Bourbon Street, you see the band, and then they transition with the music into the stadium, into the regular broadcast. That's basically every single one. I described every single Saints game for like a decade plus. And so we were wandering around, not on Bourbon Street. Literally, it's the name. Like everyone knows what that name means. We weren't on it. All me. Finally, we get there. There's snakes in the street. It smells like urine. Everything that you're accustomed to and familiar with New Orleans is there on Bourbon Street. So ended up going on a really nice tour that night. We've been back since. But again, Saturday night, be like, where are all the people? Total dumb Chad moment of can't believe I had a brain meltdown. I got wiped just like the movie. So total dumbness here in New Orleans.
Did you think you were on Bourbon Street, or did you just not know where to go?
I didn't know the name. And again, I just, for some reason, I know Friday and Saturday night would be the nights. Mm-hmm. By the way, Monday night, still very popular. So there's still plenty going on. But it's amazing, though, how you can be one block off and it looks like a completely different area. So I will say with those businesses, location is key, because it'll go to like residential and there's one random bar to you're like right in it. And talk about just being off by like 150 feet and being like, well, I double my revenue if I'm just a little bit off. So
yeah. Anyway, you spend time in the DC area. That's what DC's like. Like you could be one block away.
One block off. That's a classic
suburban Maryland.
Classic Southeast DC moment. I'm one block off and you're scared to walk to your car. One block off, really great bar. So it varies wildly. So I definitely contribute to the dumbest thing I did this week. All right, we got a few quotes from the Dynasty forum. All right, we had a terrible trade go down. Austin Eckler for Josh Jacobs and a 23 second with early potential in one quarterback and half PPR.
I don't think it's that bad.
Me either. But that was horrible. A terrible trade, a league-wrecking trade, Jordan. But we too are in the club of Josh Jacobs. Don't hate on that guy because he's probably better than you think.
Well, he's basically doing everything, right? He's monopolizing the touches as a runner, and he's the receiving option. Like he's doing both. Like he's the majority receiving option. He's not Fournette, but he's the majority receiving option right now. And you're just like, okay, well, that can very quickly turn into a situation. If this offense turns, it can quickly turn into a Fournette type season where he finishes his running back 3 overall. So I still think I'm intoxicated by the Jacobs cheapness, because if the situation ever turns good, he sort of has done both, right? We've seen him.
Or if the situation he goes to potentially
Correct.
Next year turns.
Correct.
Because again, first round guy, he's been largely healthy. He's been largely productive. This is a pretty interesting scenario if he's just allowed to float free with them not picking up the 5th-year option, if they don't tag him or something, and he just roams and picks his spot. I think it's a pretty interesting historical kind of profile that doesn't normally float free. So, and the Raiders, by the way, side point, they're a really interesting offense to watch, mostly from a frustration angle. You have 2 weeks in a row with Mac Hollins, with all the other weapons they have, saying, go sit over there. I mean, now he made every single target count. It was kind of like a fantasy camp for Mac Hollins of like what he could possibly do, putting up 30 points last week. And I'm sure Devontae Adams, he'll have much better days, and Hunter Renfrow will be back and all that stuff. But it's weird because everyone seems like they're underperforming. The team,
except Mac Hollins.
yeah, but it's Mac Hollins' world, and everyone's just living in it. Everyone's just signing royalty checks. But it's just including Jacobs, but it just feels like the whole offense. It's kind of like Denver West of just like, I feel like there's a lot of underperforming here. But if they get right, they could be one of the high-flying offenses in the NFL. Who knows if we see that in a month? All right.
Yeah.
Next one. Joshua Dobbs is the guy to have this week and moving forward for the Packers.
Joshua Dobbs for the say that again.
Sorry, Romeo Dobbs. Romeo Dobbs is the guy to have this week and moving forward for the Packers.
I was like,
now,
what
did I think a trade with Cleveland?
What happened to Rodgers?
What happened to Jordan Love?
Yeah, the hype was certainly there in the preseason. I would sell the hype, right? And this is, you go back to,
you sell it. I saw him dropped last week, Jordan. I'm putting in waiver claims in a couple leagues for him this week.
I find this to be an interesting bookend to this show, right? Because with a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's proven it, right? How many of those stories are Romeo Dobbs, right? How many Romeo Dobbs does it take for one Amon-Ra St. Brown? 10, right? Of these, hey, this guy's an uptick. He's a hot day 3 prospect. How many of them flame out, right? That the hit rate on day 3 wide receivers is like 5%, right? When they get some buzz, right, still only 1 in 10 of them becomes a true difference maker. So I think historically, if you've sold that profile, you've been ahead. So that's typically my process in these. I guess the question is, do you take a straight second, right? Is that something that you do and you reset the clock? There's one side of me that says don't do that, because if you succeed, the payoff of the wide receiver 1 for Aaron Rodgers is really high. On the other side of that, I go back to the statement that I just said, that if you did that every single time that this situation has presented itself, you'd be massively ahead. So I don't know what your sort of thoughts are on that calculus.
Yeah, I have both. We kind of both think historically, and what does that look like? How rare is a success? And then I think one thing that would be a point made by someone else, or maybe by you, if we have this dialogue, for 5-10 minutes of the pros and cons, one would be, well, how many day 3 guys got drafted over by somebody, Christian Watson in this case, but are in an environment, Amon-Ra St. Brown last year may qualify, of just saying they have the opportunity to have upward mobility of a depth chart, and they have the opportunity to show what they could do. I'm sure plenty of the misses drowned out in just, we're not going to give you a chance.
Correct.
That they could have. It's the same thing with like a quarterback landing spot, and like, would they have, achieved something with somebody else? But Romeo Dobbs, even if you look through the prism, I mean, I'll have to do one of those, again, Pro Football Reference has a really great filter going on, but like, looking at what has he done in 3 games that just day 3 guys do not get this opportunity. And he had a nice game in week 3, pretty tepid in week 1 and week 2, but he was on the field, on the radar. He got catches. And I think that is like, we're already chopping off so many of the guys that never do anything, whether it's their fault, or the team's fault, opportunity's fault. But Dobbs is we can already eliminate those. We can crush those down, like in the compactor. So I think he's got as I like to say, and I roll it off, a chip in a chair and a chance. He's got an opportunity here with Watson, who already dropped a long touchdown. He's been hurt, oft injured, and he was a raw guy to begin with. So that's your big young competition. Alan Lazard, we'll see. He's back in the fold now, but we haven't seen early signs that he's going to just be the go-to funnel, that he's Rodgers' favorite. Sounds like Rodgers likes Dobbs too. So, I just wonder what's the threshold to feel comfortable with Dobbs past this year? Like, what does he have to do? Because it seems like the bar is higher than, say, Drake London or Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave or, guys with pedigree. I mean, they can finish top 45, top 50, top 60, and there's going to be so much allegiance and confidence and insulation with those guys. But Dobbs, I feel like if he finished wide receiver 52 this year, it would be like oh my God, I can't believe I held past October.
Right.
Would be the feel when we get to January. He will be replaced. It feels like he almost has to finish in the top 24 or so. Like, it feels like he has to be overtly, unequivocally the wide receiver 1 for the Packers. And if he does that, there's going to be confidence that he's Rodgers' guy. And he's going to have shades of Devontae Adams. Like, he could be the next guy for a number of years. But unless he does that, anything below that, and I feel like you said, you play out this situation 10 times, and 9 out of the 10, you take the second and you just bank it and you move on, because it's a high threshold at wide receiver to get all the way home.
Right.
But this does feel like the storyline and equation that could be part of that 1 or 2.
Yes.
Right. So that's what makes it so
right.
I mean, you have people that are vice gripping him in Dynasty, and then there's some people in 25-man rosters that have cut him in August or in the last 2 weeks. So it's very interesting. I would say you set the price at the right zone, which is the second, which
right.
you might get a look at a first-round wide receiver in a future year. You might get a look at a day 2 running back. Those are good bets, better bets than Dobbs historically. But it's a very ambiguous. When you start moving the line to outlier stuff, it's very tough to get a historical gauge, right? I mean, you start going, well, they're better than a lot of the day 3 guys, but they're not Stephon Diggs, or they're not, they're not Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now we can start using that as a reference. So it's a very tough prism. I will say, in general, I'll probably take a shot over a naked random second, just because I think he's already in the elevated probability status, and he's going to have the rest. Nothing's going to change this year. Sammy Watkins coming back doesn't mean anything. So I don't know if this depth chart changes at all. I think we can kill the Will Fuller thing. I don't think that's happening.
It's a whole nother show.
It's a whole other show. It's a whole other therapy session. On the couch. We need to go on the couch with Sig. We need Sig. We definitely need Sig. Both of us need to be there in the horizontal position with Sig. Why not Will Fuller? That's the only question. We're going to start the show and end the show with that. So anyway, I think with Dobbs, the second is the right price point. If you can ever add to him and get a first, you walk away. If you can buy him for a third, I think that's prudent. So there's a very hardy middle ground of it depends on your take. So we've talked pros and cons, and I think it's best to just let you decide. If you have Dobbs, you have the opportunity to buy or sell him.
Yes.
All right, that's going to do it on this episode. We discussed Joshua Dobbs. I did it again. Romeo, oh Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Romeo Dobbs. And we also talked about production versus pedigree with the tight end position with Kyle Pitts. We talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown, talked about some stashes early in the show, some running back situations that are not as optimal as they could or should be or have been in the past.
And we got a couple t-shirt ideas too. By the way, at some point you actually have to do it, and we need Sig, right? A couple of good t-shirt ideas here that we're going to have to pitch for the
Absolutely. All right. I am Chad Parsons. He's Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty